Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 on the overhaul of this Dixon ZTR transaxle. We just finished putting together, reassembling the transaxle in part 1 of the video, and this is going to go ahead and be part 2, and we're going to work on the bench adjustments. Now, getting this set correctly is of the utmost importance. You can't put it back into your mower if you don't have this set right. So we're going to spend some time. My guess is the bulk of your time is going to be spent not in reassembling it, but in fact getting these adjustments set correctly. So we'll bring in those two tools I spoke of earlier in the first video and show you how those work and what we need to do to basically get this set up correctly. Then we'll go ahead, put it back in the mower. There'll be some additional adjustments that'll need to be made in the mower as well before it should work correctly for us. So stick around and we'll go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we need to get rid of these top adjustment springs, neutral springs here. This one and this one, they're neutral springs because that's what you use to set the neutral position of the mower. So when you have your levers up and you're just sitting there, the mower shouldn't be crawling forward or crawling backwards. And these two neutral springs, that's what's going to determine that. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're just going to need to take all the tension off of these cradles here, and then of course on the other side. So we're going to get these off first. We're just going to set it to the side. Okay, just take everything off there. Okay, and I already have mine off, but if you have these springs on in the back, you want to remove those as well, because you just want these basically free floating. You don't want any tension on there on the front or the back of them. Okay, so now we got everything freed up there. This tool that we got earlier, I showed earlier in the video, this is now going to come into play. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use it to make sure that these roller bars on both sides are actually perpendicular to this bench, to this plate here. So you can just set it up alongside of there, make sure it's flat on the bottom, and by looking at it I can tell you that this top needs to go in some more. So I'm going to grab a wrench, 9/16 or 14 millimeter, and we're going to go ahead and adjust that to make sure that this is basically straight up and down, that it's perpendicular to the bench here. So we're just going to move that in a little bit. Check it in. And I'll tell you what, that is pretty darn close. Maybe just a smidgen more. Okay. I am happy with that. Okay, so now we need to do the same thing over on this side again. Make sure it's flat on the bottom. And just looking at it here, I can tell you the bottom needs to get tightened up quite a bit. So we'll go ahead and snug that up. Nothing too difficult about this, just keep loosening it or tightening it and make sure you get it right so that this sits, so these roller bars are perpendicular to this table here. So the bottom leg or foot of this L should be flat against the board, and of course it should be flat right up against the side of that roller bar. Good. Okay. Now that that is set, we'll move to the next part. Alright, now that we got those roller bars set perpendicular, the next thing we want to go ahead and address is the disc cups here. We want to make sure that they are square with these cones here. So you don't want it facing this way, you don't want it going this way, it needs to be straight. In order to do that, you use the tool again, And you're going to put the back end of this up against the back end of your cradle. Try to do this without getting in your way. And go ahead and bring that up against the cup itself. And you can't see it, but if I look down, I can see there's a gap over here. So this end over here needs to go in. So in order to go in, take your Allen wrench. Hang on one sec. You can loosen up those nuts just a little. Okay. Maybe. Oh, there we go. Get that line back up on there. So there's a gap over here, so I'm going to run this in. And that should close that gap. Tell you what, that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. I'm going to do the same thing over on this cone, right over here, and make those adjustments. And then we'll be back to move on to the next part. All right, so for the next step here, we're going to set the gap between the rollers and those roller plates when they're pressed in. Hopefully this is showing up okay. I know there's a lot of backlight there. But basically, right here, you can see this roller. I got my finger on it back there, and this roller plate. We need to set the gap in between there to 0.050. That's the amount of distance that has to be in there. We'll use a feeler gauge to do that. And you want to set that as these two bars here and here of the cradle are actually pinched in together. So when they're all the way pinched in, sit against the cones, that gap there over here, this gap, that has to be at 0.050. If it's not there, then it's not going to work right. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to bolt on our assembly tool, and that'll make sure it's sitting up or down as it should be. And then we'll go ahead and we'll start setting the gap there correctly, and I'll show you how to do that. You won't see me in here with the feeler gauge because I'm going to pan out a little bit so you can see everything I'm adjusting, but this is what I'm trying to set, is the distance between that roller and this roller plate. Okay guys, using one of the bolts that came out of the ball joint on the lawnmower, we're going to go ahead and we're going to set this here, and the hole here needs to line up with the hole that's on the end of this cradle here. So we're going to go ahead and probably have to lift up just a little bit on it. Just get it lined up, and go ahead and just run that in by hand. All the way down is best. So you can make sure that's nice and tight. And all that's going to do is make sure that it's being held correctly while we're getting this roller. So that's nice and flat there. It's held up high where it needs to be. And now we can go ahead and actually set this gauge in here to 0.050. And how we do that is by loosening or adjusting this bolt, and then this pivot bolt back here. Every one of these, they're threaded the same. Everything's 1:1:1 for our ratio. So if we make one turn back here, we need to make one turn here. We need to make one turn here. So everything comes in at the same time, or out if you back it off, or a half a turn. But it's got to be the same amount of turns made on each one of these three bolts. And to make sure I do that correctly, I'm actually going to grab a paint marker and just mark the top, some reference point on every one of these, just so I don't get lost when I'm making those turns. You don't need to do that. You can just judge it the best you can when you're turning them yourself. You'll be fine. But I'm going to go ahead and mark it with a paint pen. So I'm going to grab that, and I'll be right back. Okay. Now that we got that marked, again, that's just for reference when you're turning those, because all three have to be turned the same amount each time to move those cups in or out. And that just kind of helps me keep an eye on it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and just put the feeler gauge up there and see kind of where we're at. And if we have to go in, we'll go in. Or if we have to come out, we'll back it off. So I got my feeler gauge here. I got it set. Like I said, it's 0.050 is what you're going for. And you have to check this with these pinched in, because you want the cups sitting up against the cone. So press it in with your fingers. And I actually have quite a bit of room there. So I'm going to have to snug all three of these down a little bit. And I'm probably just going to go with a half a turn each for now, just to see where that leaves me. And then we'll check it again, and again, just keep tightening it until we get it where we need to go. Okay, so there's that. Make a half a turn here. Kind of like that. Okay. Again, we're just gonna press that up against there, check it and see. It's pretty darn close. You're gonna tighten them up just a smidgen each. When you're setting it, I just personally like just a little bit of resistance on those gauges. Just want it to drag just a little bit. That's good. Okay. So we set the one on this side. So now we're going to have to take this off. I'm going to switch it over to the other side and do the exact same thing over here. So I'll go ahead and turn the camera off. I'll do it on that side, and then we'll show you the next step. One of the things I want to share with you guys when I was doing the other side is that as you continue to make adjustments, trying to set the gap here between this roller and the roller plate, it's really easy for everything else to kind of get out of whack. So I was just using a speed square, and it seemed to work pretty well. You can set that on the back there and make sure that this is still correct as far as where it needs to sit. And then also even making sure that this is perpendicular to the base here. You know, you can set that down there and check that out as well. Because you can't take this off because this is holding the cradle up where it needs to be. So what I would do is either get maybe a couple of these or get a speed square, leave this here, and then use this after you set that adjustment to go back and check and make sure everything else is where it needs to be. Because what I found out is once I had gotten done, everything just seemed like it was off just a little bit. And so having that speed square and being able to use that while using this tool to hold it at the right height, that really seemed to help. Okay, so now we can go on and move on to tightening down the lock nuts on the pivot bolts on the back here. You'll need a 11/16 wrench, then your Allen key. Go ahead and just keep the Allen key in there so it doesn't accidentally turn on you as you're trying to snug these up. One on that side. One sec here. I was going to point out, at this point, after you got those pivot bolts locked down, it'd be a good time just to check everything again. So using your gauge, again, put this on your base plate, make sure these rollers are perpendicular, that everything's lining up on each one of these, and they all look good. And also, come to the back here, go ahead and put this on back here, make sure that everything is, these cups are perpendicular to the back of the cradle, again on each side. And I've already checked this, but I'll check again, it never hurts. I think everything there looks good. So once you're happy with that, now we can go ahead and move on to the next place. You're going to want to check this often as you go throughout, because you'll find as you make different adjustments, it is going to change kind of everything. So just make every adjustment very small, And then just be careful to go back through and keep checking those because those all have to stay in the right place in order for this to work. Okay, for the next part, I'm going to bring you over here and show you these rubber springs in the back here. We're going to go ahead and get them placed onto the cradle. In order for that to happen, hoping I can show it, you can see this piece right here. This, we'll say bolt, is threaded on. You can see some threads sticking out right below it there. So you can turn this whole piece and the whole thing will go out farther or come in. So you want to back it down so that we can get this cup to sit up underneath here. Before we do that, you want to make sure that this L rod here, right over here, it just comes across and then you put a nut on this end. You want to make sure that it is laying inwards, that it's pointing in towards the cradle here, kind of at a 90-degree angle there. And then you want to make sure that these springs, when they sit up on here, are perpendicular, or I'm sorry, are parallel to the back of this casting here, okay? So we're going to just put those up there. But what you can't see when I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to adjust this here by backing them off so that these springs will sit above and below here, and then we'll start working on the top. So for the first one here, I need to get this spring up underneath here. You see I can't quite make that. I already have these nuts backed off about as far as they can go. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring this in. And with that, I should have enough room to swing that up on there. Maybe also take these off a little ways as well. Maybe a little more. There you go. Now you can see we can get these set up on there. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hang on to this here. And I want to go ahead and just run up that tube that's on the, basically an all thread. We're going to run that up until it kind of just starts snugging up underneath this lip. So this is completely floating. I'm just tightening up this bottom one here. Just want to put some tension on there. Not a whole lot, but enough. Okay. Come around here and do the same thing on the other side. And go ahead and walk this down. Pull these up. Okay. Set that over just like that. And again, I'm going to grab the bottom part here and I'm just going to twist it up. And all we're doing is just compressing the bottom rubber spring. One of the things you do want to make sure is that these eye bolts that are on here, you want them to not sitting in there cockeyed. You want them basically just straight up and down is what I'm trying to say. Good. Now, next thing we're going to do is set the preload on these rubber bushings. So, in order to do that, this is where the back side of this tool comes in. If you don't have these cups on yours, you can use this to measure the gap that needs to be set between them. Between the bottom of this cup and the top of this one here, or your washers. But because I have these cups, I can't use this space. But if you don't have it, that's what that's for. So instead, I need to use this one to set the preload on here. So we're going to go ahead and run down this lower jam nut on both sides until we get the compression we need that this would fit in there. Now when you do that, you need to hang on to that little knob on the bottom there that I was tightening those with so that that doesn't turn on you as you're tightening this jam nut. So just hang on to it with a pair of pliers. You can probably use your fingers, but it might be hard to hang on to once it starts snugging up here. And we're just going to go ahead and bring this down until it gets where we need. can see, boy, we are really close. Still just take a little bit more. More. There we go. So that one's done. Go ahead and do the same thing on this side. Good, just like that. So just make sure that you have the right tool depending on what you're working on. And I think this one was, they said early 1999 to present. So if your mower's past that age, you're probably gonna need this. But also I believe it has to do with the cups. If you have the cups, I'm pretty confident you're going to need the new tool. If you don't have the cups, you just have washers, then the original tool here should be more than sufficient for you. Okay, I'm happy with that. Okay, now that those are set properly, we'll go ahead and run down this top lock nut. Okay. Alright, so by holding the bottom jam nut, we're going to go ahead and turn this top lock nut so that doesn't back out on us. Snug those up. There we go. And we're done. And now we're on to the next step. Okay, now that we got the preload set on those back springs, back here, we're now going to come back up to the front where these cradle arms are. And we're going to use our gauge again. And what you want to do is set it on the outside here, make sure it's flat, and then see if your holes line up. Now, they shouldn't line up right now, if you did it correctly. The cradle arm here should be just a little bit lower than the hole here. So if I tried to run a bolt through there right now, grab mine real quick, it's not going to go through because they're not lined up. This is a little bit lower. The way you can tell if you're right or not is if you put this up here and this cradle arm is above this eye in our assembly gauge tool, you know you did something wrong in the back and you actually need to go back and check that out and readjust those. So that's the case. So now that this is off, it should be a little lower just as it is. We're going to go back to those springs back here and we're going to tighten both of these nuts and bring that down. As we put tension on there, it's going to lift this arm up. And we want to bring it up high enough so that we can go ahead and put a bolt through it right here. We've got to make sure that this gauge is going to be flat on the surface here while we do that. So mine does need to come up, definitely not that much. So I'll go ahead and grab this here. We're just going to keep turning both of them at the same time. And you could actually watch that come into the position. It's probably worth noting, I'm actually grabbing onto both of these nuts back here at the same time as I'm turning it. So they're turning together as one. I think that's just about right. Okay. so that one's done. We're going to come over here and do the same thing on this side. Again, it should be just a little bit lower than what you need. Come over here. Again, grab both of those bolts, or those nuts on the back. And go ahead. This one's not off by much. That's got all that needs. That to go ahead, screw in. So now these are sitting at the correct height with the correct tension on the back there. Again, if you come back up here and this cradle arm's higher than the hole on your adjustment tool, you've done something wrong and you need to fix it in the back before you move on to this next step. But we were okay. These cradle arms were lower than that hole, and so we just tightened both of the nuts in the back. That lifted up these cradle arms on each side until the holes lined up and we could run that bolt through. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to adjust the disc cups, these guys here, so they no longer are making contact with the cone. If I spin this right now, you can see this cone is actually turning with it, or the cup is turning with the cone. Got my hand here on the other one. So what we have to do in order to fix that is, one, I got to get this assembly gauge back over here on this side. Then we're going to come back here, and again, we're going to grab both of these nuts at the same time with the wrench, and we're either going to tighten it or we're going to loosen it. And that'll move this cone kind of teeter-totter up and down on here until we're making no contact with it. We don't want any contact between this cone and this disc cup. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over. Okay. I'm going to come around here. I'm going to turn this underneath. You can see how this one is making contact here again. So with this, we're just going to kind of move it. I'm going to back it off. I don't know which way I actually need to go. We're going to go back it off about a quarter turn. And that seemed to help. So we'll keep going. And there you can see it is starting to lose contact with it. If you do go too far, as you saw I did there, it's going to start picking it back up again. So that's okay. We'll just go back the other way. There we go. Now you can see that spinning on there, and we're not making contact anymore. Now this one's going to be making contact because it doesn't have just that little bit of lift from the tool over here, which is okay because the bars are going to hold that up just a little bit. When it's in there, you can see once it's in there as well, we should be okay. I need to adjust it a little bit too. But for right now, we're just looking at this side, and you can see as that's spinning, that is no longer making contact with that cone. So that's what we're looking for. Just looking in the back, they're both adjusted to about the same height for me, so that might be your case as well. So we're on our last piece here. We just need to go ahead and set the neutral springs up. I've already went ahead and done the one on the other side, and so we just got the one left here to do, and then we'll be finished with this. So a couple things before we get started. This neutral rod, it's supposed to be centered in this hole where it comes to the cradle, and it says there's actually a note in the service manual that says if it's not, you need to straighten it out or replace the rod. Now, both on this one and on this one, neither are going straight through that hole, dead center. I pulled them both. I pulled them out. It's as straight as an arrow. So I don't know what's going on there. That said, what I did was I just took it and actually bent it over a little bit, so it's a little more centered than normal. That's what I'm going to go ahead and do here on this one before I get started on anything else. Just kind of bend it over and go with it. So I don't have a problem doing that. I don't think it's going to be any issue. I guess if it does become an issue, I'll find out soon enough. But that's what I'm going to do to try to center it up in that hole, is just bend it over a little bit. I'm not going to get crazy on it, just a little bit, but enough to hopefully bring it up into that center, a little closer to the center there. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do now. Last time I just grabbed it with the wrench and just pulled over on it, and that seemed to work okay. Just like that. You put the nut on there, I suppose, so you don't hurt the threads, but just enough to kind of move it over a little bit, and you'll see when you're doing it what I'm talking about. So now that we did that, the next thing we need to do is go ahead and put on our plate, which is right here. It just slides down over the top. We can set this guy on there too. Little rubber spring. So mine will have the rubber springs. Yours might have another spring like this up top here, but it's all the same thing. You go ahead and put that on. Go ahead and just put the nut on. What we also need to set down at the bottom here is where we need to use this gauge tool. And we are going to use this piece right, bring it down into where you can see it here, right here. We're going to use this to set the tension on our neutral spring. So this piece right here, we're going to put down at the bottom, and it's going to go between the lock nut and then the jam nut. So what I'll do is I'll turn the camera off here for a second, try to get it a little bit closer so you can see what I'm doing, and we'll go ahead and get that set. So I know this is pretty close, but hopefully you can make it out. This is the lock nut on the bottom of the neutral spring rod, and then this is the actual nut we're going to use to adjust the tension here on the spring. So I'm going to go ahead and start tightening this up. And we have to get it pretty tight here, so it might take me a second. Oops. Hang on, just about knocked you over. Okay. So then we want to take this tool, and then this piece right here, that is our gauge for the gap that we need between this lock nut and this adjustment nut right here. So I can put that up there. I know that's really hard to see, but it is not enough. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this up a little bit more. I'll go grab a light so you guys can see this, and then I'll be right back. Alright, so I got this adjusted. Shining some light here so you can see it better. So this has got to sit in between that lock nut on the bottom and that adjusting nut on the top there. So I hope with that you can kind of see what I'm talking about there, but that's how you gauge that, and that's how you're going to set the tension on this lower spring here of the neutral spring. So once you get it set like that, you're good, and then we can move on to the next part. Okay, on this part here where we're going to go ahead and tighten down this top nut here on the neutral spring, this is where the adjustment's going to come in. We're going to go ahead and tighten this down, and once it starts getting snugged up, you're going to have to reach underneath the bench again so we can turn the cones here on top. And we're going to keep turning this, so keep tightening that up until this cup no longer makes contact with this cone. We want it to spin freely. At that point, we're going to stop. We're going to mark the nut, the location of it, and then we're going to go ahead and keep turning until it starts to make contact again, and then we're going to have to back it off 1/2 of those turns. It sounds like a lot, but really it's not too bad. So I'll go ahead and get started here. We're just going to go ahead and tighten this down, snug it up. Okay, so now let's put a little tension on there. So now you're going to spin this from underneath just because it's easiest where the pulley is there. You can see as I'm turning that, it's making contact with this cup. So we're just going to go ahead and keep tightening this until it stops. Okay, now you can see I'm spinning it right now, and it's not, oh, there it is moving it just a little bit maybe. No, that's got it. I might back it up just a little bit. Okay, so it's barely catching right there. Okay, and now we can spin that and it's not touching at all. Just going to use a paint marker to mark the nut. That way when I'm counting turns, it's just easier, that's all. Okay, so we got that marked. So now that we've noted the position of the nut, I'm going to continue counting the number of turns, turning it clockwise, tightening up until the disc cup starts to drag again. And right when it starts to drag again, then we're going to turn the nut counterclockwise or backwards 1/2 of the counted revolutions. So I'll get this out here for it. So basically, I'm going to be spinning that cone again. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to start turning this until that cup makes contact with that cone again. So there's a 1/2 a turn. And there's one full turn. It's starting to make contact. Do about 1 1/4 turn. Keep going. Okay, you can see it's about 1 1/2 turns that's now spinning that again. Okay, so now that we know it's 1 1/2 turns, we're going to take this back off 1/2 of that, or 3/4 of a turn. And that's why making these reference marks are so helpful. Okay, so there's 1/2 a turn. And another 1/4, something about like that. And that should spin free. And there you can see that spinning without any issues. So that is properly set on both sides. So now that that is done, we can go ahead and tighten this little nut in the back here on these springs. It's a 7/16 inch nut. And we can go ahead and tighten that down all the way, and we will be pretty much completed at that point. So I'm going to snug that up. All right, with that adjustment, this concludes the bench adjustments on the transaxle. And the next step will be to put it into the mower. There will be another video for that if you wish to see that step as well. But for now, thanks for watching. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those in the comment box below. And we'll see you guys in the next video.